Hi guys, it's Kirsty. Today's video is a bit of a tough love video about how we need to take responsibility for our own recovery journeys. But before I go into that, I would like to ask, please do subscribe by clicking on the subscribe button below in order to stay up to date with new videos as they're released. So the reason I wanted to do this video is because I wanted to stress the importance of taking responsibility for our own recoveries. We can have the most knowledgeable about OCD, understanding and helpful, non-reassuring families, partners, friends, therapists, OCD coaches. But at the end of the day, it's us who needs to change our behaviours and us who needs to change our beliefs. So we're the ones who are in control of working on that. So, you know, it can be like, we can ask our partners to stop giving us reassurance when we ask, or we could ask our parents, you know, make sure our parents could stop participating in rituals or whatever people may have been kind of misguidedly doing in the past before maybe knowing about OCD. So our close people in our lives can stop giving us reassurance. They can stop participating in rituals or anything like that. Which will be very helpful for our recovery. But the thing that will help to stop that fear cycle is us stop believing that we need to ask for reassurance and that we need to perform rituals and that we need to perform compulsions. So if we're still asking for reassurance, even if we're getting told no, that anxiety will be building in our bodies and in our minds, because our minds still feel like we need to be given that reassurance, so we're not being given it. And by us asking for reassurance, even if we don't get it, we're still reinforcing that cycle, because the very act of asking for reassurance is telling our brain, this is still really important. I still think this is really awful and I really need to know that this is not true, or that I won't do this, or that this won't happen. So, it's kind of all about what we're still teaching our brains essentially with our behaviors when it comes to performing, physical compulsions and asking for reassurance. And the same goes for avoidance. Our families can be like, no, you have to stop avoiding doing this thing, and kind of pretty much almost drag us there. But if we're still, literally being dragged, sweating and panting, it's, yes, you're going to that place you've been avoiding, but we're still sending the message to our brains that it's dangerous, it's awful, we can't stand it. And so the cycle continues. So for me, when it came to my recovery journey with ROCD, there was a big part of my recovery where I needed to stop involving my partner at all. I needed to stop talking to him about having a bad day with the ROCD. Instead, I would maybe, if he asked me that, what if something was wrong, I'd maybe say, I've just had an anxious day. I got to the point where I stopped mentioning ROCD to him, because I just thought, we obviously want to be able to have a hug from our family or our partners, and things like that. And that's fine, we need to be giving ourselves compassion, and it's nice to receive compassion as well and comfort from time to time. But, there comes a point where we don't need to be sharing all of our thoughts with our, family members or our partners, because we're working on our recovery journey. And in order to do that, this is where we're starting to work on our disputing of our irrational beliefs and changing our beliefs surrounding our obsessions and our anxieties, so that we can, reduce the fear cycle and bring that down, which will give us, more confidence when practicing not avoiding and not performing compulsions, but also help to slow things down mentally as well, to help us with the mental rumination. And while we're doing that and working on our, changing our irrational beliefs, if we still feel the need to, continuously talk about our OCD, our thoughts to anyone around us and all of that, it's kind of still sharing, sharing the responsibility a little bit, when actually the responsibility is ours. You know, we're the ones having the thoughts, we're the ones who have OCD, we're the ones that need to work on changing those beliefs. Other people, much as they love us and they want to help us change our perspective, they can't. It's only down to us. We're the only ones who can show our minds that this feared scenario doesn't warrant the level of fear that we're currently conjuring for it at the moment. So we need to be the ones convincing our brains. If we're not doing that, if we're not actively working on disputing our irrational beliefs, and if we're not actively practicing not avoiding, so if we're going, you know, if we're the ones, if we're, you know, going after doing our exposures and seeking our exposures, this is all reinforcing us changing our irrational beliefs. Our brain is in the background taking notes, learning, okay, this isn't as scary as we originally thought, so maybe I can stop sounding the alarms quite as much and reduce the sound level on the alarms, or reduce the frequency of the alarms. So part of the, you know, the several benefits of exposures, but a part of it is, you know, it's showing a willingness to put yourself in certain situations that would trigger the feelings, and a willingness to experience these things, a willingness to take, you know, calculated risks. You know, all of it needs to be obviously agreed with therapists, OCD coaches, and done in safe ways, but you know, it feels like a risk to us when we're doing it. So we're showing willingness to take these risks because we're trying to reinforce the belief that it's not awful and we could cope with the consequences. We're showing willingness to bring on the obsessions. We're showing willingness to feel the discomfort that will come on from triggering ourselves by performing exposures. So if we were forced into exposures, okay, so in some way, if you find yourself in exposure in a situation where you're exposed to something triggering, you know, it can be helpful. Like, for example, if you suffer from ROCD and you go to a wedding, so this could be triggering. You know, it's kind of automatic exposure that you haven't necessarily, you know, set up for yourself. It can still be helpful, but the true helpful ones are ones that we set up and that we go willingly, you know, into, because we're showing our minds that we're reinforcing the new belief that it's not as awful as we once thought it was, and we can stand it, and we are willing to live with the uncertainty, allowing that risk to be there. But if somebody's kind of, you know, literally having to coax you into it and like force you, and, you know, no dinner if you don't do your exposure or something like that, that's a bad example, but bear with me here. You're doing it, you know, through gritted teeth and you don't want to do it. It's like, yeah, you're not going to enjoy doing the exposure, but if you're doing it like that, almost being kind of like having to be talked into it, forced into it or something, you're not kind of backing up these new beliefs that you're trying to work on, that it's not as awful as you once thought and you could cope with it. Whereas if you take responsibility, you know, okay, so I've had this exposure suggested to me by my therapist or OCD coach. They can't make me do it, only I can do it. So, you know, I want to feel a bit better. We've discussed that this might be something that could help me. Do it. You know, that you want to go and do it, and, you know, bring on that discomfort, because it's going to help you. You know, and this is where I also want to mention, you know, we have our therapists or OCD coaches to kind of look at what our fears might be and to work on, you know, exposures, whatever they may be, and work on changing our beliefs and some of our behaviours, and maybe talking about what we might be avoiding or doing in our lifestyle. So, you know, those people, we go to them for their assistance to kind of help us. But they're not going to be the ones who get us better either. They can advise using their own experience and expertise. But your OCD, no matter, as much as this, you might not want to hear this, it's not exactly the same as any other person's OCD. you know, so your therapist can, you know, make, you know, advise on things and all of that. But if you have, you know, a bad week or two, and then you feel it maybe annoyed with other people or your therapist, it's your own kind of, you know, you can still look at, but hang on, you can still look at your own behaviors and to see if, you know, now actually, were you engaging in compulsions? Were you actually getting a bit, were you ruminating? You know, even if you're not doing physical compulsions or avoiding, were you ruminating? And were you asking some subtle reassurance questions that have maybe reinforce that cycle? You know, it's these things that we want to start noticing for ourselves, because we're not going to be working with our therapists or OCD coaches forever. So you need, and OCD is, you know, obviously we get to the point of recovery, but we need to maintain recovery. And in order to do this, we need to be learning along the journey, and with that learning comes taking responsibility for our own recovery and taking responsibility for our own behaviours. And some of that may be, you know, really take a look at yourself and owning if we're doing any behaviours that may be reinforcing our OCD, which may have been why we've had a bad week or two. And again, here, I also want to mention, so between sessions, and this is if you're lucky enough, you know, if you're lucky enough to be able to see a therapist or an OCD coach, again, you know, if you're having a bit of a period of plateau in your recovery for a while, it's good to look back between your sessions now. Are you doing all of your homework? You know, are you doing the exposures that have been discussed? Are you doing your, are you reading have you worked through the recommended reading list? I believe Hannah may have done a video about the importance of the reading list and why it's there. Nobody else can read those books for you. You know, you might have some questions and ask for you know, some people to clarify anything after you've read them, but you're the only person that can, you know, help read through them yourself and get that proper understanding. So it's good to, you know, have you read through their reading list? Have you started working on your irrational beliefs? You know, it's looking at things like that, you know, in between sessions. If you're plateaued, is it because that you're not working on your irrational beliefs enough and you need to up your game a little bit? So this is why I wanted to talk about the importance of recognising it as our own responsibilities and ours alone. If we're lucky to have people in our lives that can support us and help us on our journey, and if we're lucky enough to be able to have the assistance of a OCD coach or therapist, then that's great, and that's extra supplementary things. But we're the ones responsible for putting ourselves in the situations that will, you know, trigger our obsessions, in order to, you know, show, as I said, to show our minds that we can stand it. And it's almost like, especially if you make the choice to bring it all on, you're not only you're showing your brain that you want to bring it on, you know, you're really, really enforcing those new beliefs. So this is why having that attitude that this is my thing, I have to work on it. This is, you know, it's what behaviors am I doing? And as I say, this is a process. The things that we learn on our recovery journey are things that we want to be taking forward with us into the next few years and time after that, because there will be times in our lives that will be difficult because of external things not related to OCD. And we may find times that maybe trigger a little bit of a spike or something, you know, and we want to know how to deal with that when that happens. And the way to do that is by looking at ourselves and our behaviours and learning about our own OCD and what might trigger us, and truly taking responsibility for our own recovery and being proactive with it and, you know, motivated with it. So I hope this video has been helpful. It is incredibly important for us to be proactive in our recovery. Nobody else can get us better, unfortunately. It has to come from us. But I hope it has been helpful, and do take care. Bye.